In the past few months, we have seen a rallying cry for structural changes to policing sweep the nation as a result of long-standing systemic issues in law enforcement. Because of this, I've been researching the culture of policing in Las Vegas, where this culture looks like a jurisdiction that has extended beyond the typical duties of policing, thus resulting in racial disparities and an enormous operating budget. For the purposes of this presentation, I am focusing on the jurisdiction of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Here, I break down the calls they have responded to so far in 2020. This data is from LVMPD Weekly Statistical Crime Briefings. I use this data to look at the various types of calls that the LVMPD received, both at the general metro level and within the 5 area commands that received the most calls to date this year. Next, within each breakdown, I documented how many calls the LVMPD received for violent crime, property crime, calls for service, officer-initiated calls, and traffic fatalities. I also isolated the variable of vehicle stops, as they tend to make up a significant portion of officer-initiated calls. First, I looked at the call breakdown for the entire metropolitan area. At this level of analysis, I found that the majority of calls that the LVMPD receives are calls for service or officer-initiated calls, rather than calls for violent or property crimes. Next, I found that the same pattern could be seen within all of the LVMPD's area commands, such as the South Central Area Command seen here. This area command, which encompasses UNLV and its surrounding area, received the most calls out of the LVMPD's 10 area commands. With this, however, the number of calls for service and officer-initiated calls drastically outnumbers the calls related to violent or property crimes. The number of calls for service seen here is nearly 70 times greater than the number of calls for violent crime. It is also worth noting that nearly half of these officer-initiated calls were vehicle stops. The same trend can be seen when any level of analysis is considered. Furthermore, I found that the same trend could even be seen in the Northeast Area Command, which received the most calls for violent crimes to date this year. Even with this, the number of violent crimes still pales in comparison to the number of calls for service and officer-initiated calls. The number of calls for service seen here is approximately 50 times greater than the number of calls related to violent crime. This is significant because multiple levels of analysis are showing that policing is becoming less about serious crimes that would actually need police officers. Many types of calls for service or officer-initiated calls are nonviolent proceedings, with some examples being related to public health or traffic control. This raises concerns over how we approach law enforcement and begs the acknowledgement that more specialized professions may have better approaches to some of these types of calls. By carefully considering what the culture of policing looks like in the present, specifically with regards to the LVMPD, Las Vegas can prepare for tomorrow's solutions.